The open world in Guild Wars 2 is the bulk of the available content, and there are a few ways to play it. Some people want to run fast and loose with full power DPS, self boon build, which is my preferred way to play. Those builds were highlighted in my open world builds video. But in this video, there is another take. Instead of prioritizing damage with boons and survivability as a secondary, these builds prioritize survivability and boons with damage as a secondary component. Now, these are not entirely tank builds, and they are not entirely boon support builds like you would see in raids, but I have done a good amount of standardization across all 9 of these builds for ease of understanding and, most importantly, easy adoption, especially for new players. These are the Guild Wars 2 Immortal open world builds. Let's talk about the gear standardization for these builds. It is going to be Celestial gear. This gear is most easily achieved through the use of a level 80 boost that you can get from purchasing the expansions. If you just need the gear on a character that is already level 80, you can still use the level 80 boost to get the Celestial equipment, but if you don't have any of those available, you can get it all easily from the World vs. World vendor. For food, once again, we are going to be rocking the golden fried dumplings for that might and that boon duration. It is cheap and it helps you keep those boons for longer. The runes for these builds are almost all the same, with runes of the Trapper, which are a Condi damage rune set. If these are a little bit pricey or out of reach for you, you can substitute those runes for Nightmare, which has a little bit of a downside. There is one build that runs alternate runes outside of Trapper runes, but I will cover that when it comes up. For sigils and relic, it is largely up to preference. Many people want to focus on damage with their sigils since their gear set and trait covers survivability. Sigils like Doom, Torment, Smoldering, Fragility, these all help with the DPS aspects of the build, while others might want to adopt other sigils like Cleansing or Energy that give a little bit of extra survivability or help exploit like a class mechanic. I'm looking at you, Vindicator and Mirage. Similarly, these sigils and relics for all of these builds are going to be preference. Relics like Nyos or Aristocracy work, while Rivers or Chronomancer or any number of relics will work depending on how you want to tailor these builds. So there is a little bit of openness in these builds for you to pick your own adventure. Have some fun with it, play around with it, and figure out what you like the most. For the Revenant, we are going to go with the Vindicator. The Immortal Condi Vindicator build is tried and true. It runs Alliance and Malix with Mace, Axe, and Spear or Shortbow for its weapons. You are going to be running Corruption 132, Salvation 322, and Vindicator 232 for the traits. Once again, full Celestial with Trapper runes. And this build is an absolute animal of a build. Condi Celestial Vindicator is really dominant in the open world because it has built-in quickness generation from a skill on the Alliance stance. Its frequent dodges also double as an attack and boon extension, and this build is arguably the best Immortal build in the game overall in terms of survivability and damage balance. It is very spammy and fast-paced, but overall, there's really nothing not to like about this build. Since Spear is also a Condi weapon, it fits in well with the Condi Vindicator. However, it works fine with Shortbow if you do not have Janthier. The damage from this build comes from Condis, primarily Torment, so keep that in mind when you are picking sigils. But you get your boons from your Legendary Alliance stance, and then you swap over to Malix for those big Condis with the Malix Elite. And since this build heavily uses dodges, Sigil of Energy is super valuable on both weapon sets. For the Ranger, once again, we are looking at the Untamed, but this time we are running Condi. So we are looking at Dagger Mace with Warhorn as your offhand weapon. Your skills are going to be We Heal as One, Quickening Zephyr, Exploding Spores, Sun Spirit, and Entangle. For your traits, you are running Skirmishing 132, Wilderness Survival 322, and Untamed 112. You are running the standard gear with Celestial and Trapper, and the Untamed is an absolute animal. Like, the Untamed was very strong in the full Berserker version of this build. This is the Condi variant. The Untamed is an absolute beast of a ranger build, mainly because of all of the free healing and stuff you get from Untamed. This has even more defensive traits in it. So I covered the strength and inherent healing of the Untamed build using the Unleashed skills in the open world Berserker variant. However, this build is more geared towards survivability. It gets a ton of boons from your skills. You're adding in Warhorn, and the playstyle is similar to the Power Open World build with a lot of swapping between your skills, but now you have all of your utility skills to also use, and your pet unleashes. Pets can be up to preference. It is still up close and personal because you are running Dagger, but it is a very strong Condi variant of the Untamed. For the Warrior, once again, we are looking at Berserker. I feel like Berserker in PvE is probably the most fun build. With that, we are not doing a Power Berserker. We are doing a Condi Berserker. So we're going to be running Longbow and Sword Torch. Our skills are going to be Blood Reckoning, Outrage, 4 Great Justice, Shattering Blow, and Headbutt. And you are going to be running Defense 3-1-2, Arms 1-2-2, and Berserker 1-2-2. Once again, Celestial Gear, Trapper Runes. This is the most survivable variation of the DPS Condi Warrior, where you blast out your Longbow Primal Burst skills to generate fire fields. You use your elite finishers and sword autos to get those Condis out. And this build is highlighted by the King of Fires trait in the Berserker line, which increases burn duration and gives you more access to Fire Aura, which will also detonate when you use your Berserker skills. So you can just keep pumping out burning on your foes. And this build plays pretty similar to other Berserker builds where you are primarily focusing around your Primal Burst, except you will be swapping between your weapon sets frequently. This build does have a good amount of damage even outside of the prolonged fights because Sword Torch set is very strong. You have sword auto attacks which apply Condis, but you also have your torch fire field that you can then combo with the leap of your sword. It does have some built-in quickness from the Heat the Soul trait in the Berserker line, which is probably the best PvE trait in the Warrior arsenal in general. However, this build is a lot of fun and it is significantly more survivable than other options. And since fire is your main DPS, sigils like Smoldering are a good pick for this build. For the Guardian, this time we are looking at Willbender, and we are running Pistol Torch and Pistol Offhand for our weapons. For our skills, we're running Litany of Wrath, Sword of Justice, Bow of Truth, Purging Flames, and Feel My Wrath. And we are running the standard gears. For traits, we are running Radiance 2-2-1, Virtues 3-2-1, and Willbender 1-2-1. And the Willbender is absolutely great for solo play since its virtues generate its boons, and it can stack those effects on top of each other. The only real alternative would be running Willbender 3-2-1, which gives you additional healing when your Willbender flames hit enemies. So if you're running into problems running this Immortal build, you might want to swap Willbender 1 to Willbender 3 on that very first trait. Overall, this build is about stacking your virtues, which gives you your boons, like I said, and you are swapping weapons and blasting out that fire damage. Similar to the Berserker, you probably want to run Smoldering sigils for that extra burning. Willbender has a bunch of inherent defenses and offensive capabilities thanks to virtues and its utilities. It has a very strong core kit. So what I suggest here are exactly that. They're just suggestions and they can be swapped out with your personal preferences for more utility, Condi cleanses, or whatever you feel you need. For the Necro, we are moving away from Reaper and we are looking at Scourge. Now, there are very strong Reaper builds out there, but I personally prefer the Scourge as the Immortal build for Celestial Gear. We are running Scepter Dagger with offhand Pistol Torch. For your skills, you are running Sand Flare, Blood is Power, Signet of the Undeath, Spectral Armor, and Flesh Golem. For traits, you are running Curses 1-3-3, Soul Reaping 1-1-3, and Scourge 222 using the standard gear of Celestial Trapper. The Condi's Scourge in its full DPS form running Viper's gear is one of the most broken builds in the game. It's super strong. And similarly, the Heal Scourge running full Harriers or Minstrel's gear is also one of the most broken healers in the game. So what do you think happens when you combine those two builds to a Celestial variation? Well, you end up with an absolutely unkillable monster in the open world. This build has a ton of barrier, a ton of Condi cleanses, a ton of Condis and boon strips, and it is all around one of my favorite open world builds. Just as an added bonus, this was the build that I used to solo cap my guild hall for my private guild, for my personal guild bank and all that stuff a while back. So if you want a build that can really do it all and you don't want to play Vindicator or you don't want to play Mirage, Scourge is the next best option. This build has been around for a while and it is a tried and true. It is one of my personal favorites to play when things get challenging. Now for the Mesmer, I am going with the Mirage. Now the Mirage does not see a lot of love from ArenaNet, typically on balance, but it's because it is an absolutely broken class, and if you buff it just even a little too much, it becomes way better than every other class in the game. So even though it doesn't compete on the DPS charts like it used to, it is still an extremely strong class just because of the way it's built out. For the Mirage, we are running Staff with the traits Dueling 223, Chaos 233, and Mirage 221. For skills, you're running the Heal Mantra, Signet of Ether, Signet of Domination, the Stability Mantra, and Jaunt. For your gear, you're going to be running the standard gear, and if you don't have the money for a Trapper, you can run Nightmare Runes, like I said earlier. But the Staff Mirage build is an absolute menace in the open world. Staff generates a lot of boons for yourself, especially when you are running that Chaos trait line. But it also applies a ton of conditions as well. So you have a significant amount of evade frames with this build just because of the way the Mirage works. You are spamming your evades to trigger a special attack. And then you also get evade frames from your shatter skills because you will generate Mirage Mirrors. This is another build where the energy sigil really shines and it takes this build to the next level. This is one of my favorite Mesmer builds in general. I've covered this build in the past and it's in a solo video, but I want to let you know that it is still one of my favorites. It is an old but gold build, and its ability to solo legendary mobs or solo extremely hard hero points makes it a strong contender for my favorite. There are alternative Chrono Immortal builds and Virtuoso Immortal builds, but this one really takes the cake. It does a little bit lower damage than some of the Mirage alternatives. You can use Dagger and Shield or Dagger and Torch with Pistol offhand, and that will likely yield higher damage. But the boon production and ease of play of Staff makes it hard for me to want to change this build at all. For the Elementalist, we are once again looking at the Catalyst. Now, the Celestial Catalyst, some people mentioned in the last open world build video that I did, and they said that Celestial Catalyst is absolutely great. And you know what? They are 100% right. We're running Hammer for the traits. You're running Fire 111, Earth 212, and Catalyst 233. For skills, you are running Signet of Restoration, Signet of Fire, Armor of Earth, Signet of Earth, and Glyph of Elements. You're running the standard gear, and like I said earlier, the Celestial Catalyst is an animal. Hammer provides a ton of boons and utilities in combination with your Jade Sphere mechanic. You will also deal a lot of damage with Condis through the Fire Attunement. Your utilities are largely signets, so it's easy to play compared to some other Elementalist builds. And to be honest, you provide a ton of boons and an AoE around you, so this build does function really well as a general group support build while also adding a lot of tankiness to the build. This one is really tanky and forgiving, and it has a lot of baked in utility between the elements, so there's really no going wrong when you are playing this build. For the Thief, we are looking at the Deadeye. For this one, we are running Dagger and Shortbow, with your traits being Shadow Arts 222, Trickery 313, and Deadeye 131, with your skills being Signet of Malice, Caltrops, Spider Venom, Mercy, and Shadow Meld. This is the only build with an alternative rune set. You are going to be running Crate Runes, and the reason for that is it gives you higher bleed duration. The Celestial Deadeye build plays similarly to the Condi Daredevil without having to dodge in between your Death Blossoms. Instead, you just use your Steel skill to gain those Malice stacks, and then you just blast out your Death Blossom. You also want to incorporate your utility skills, though your primary damage is from that Dagger. Shortbow is mostly used for mobility or ranged DPS options, since it does have some Condi fields that it can drop, like poison fields that you can then capitalize on if you want. But for the most part, you're just getting flung all around with your Dagger, and you get a lot of evade frames from that, so it is super fun to play. There may be better Immortal build options for the Deadeye. I know that there are some really cheesy pistol Deadeye builds that are very effective. There is also likely some Condi Spectre builds, since that does have a strong Condi DPS option, and it also is a primary healer spec for the build, so you may be able to find a good balance there if you want. But overall, the Deadeye is a lot of fun with the Dagger playstyle. For the Engineer, we are looking at the Mechanist, the so-called noob class, as I like to say, and you are going to be running Spear or Pistol if you do not have Janthier. For traits, you are running Explosives 213, Firearms 123, and Mechanist 221. You are going to be using Heal Turret, Flamethrower, Barrier Signet, Shift Signet, and Overclocking Signet, and you are running standard gear with the Celestial and Trapper runes. And here we are, finally, last but not least, with the Engineer. In this Celestial version of the Condi Mechanist, you can swap out Flamethrower or Superconducting Signet if you prefer that. But overall, this is the Mechanist in its final form. You have a pet, you do a ton of Condi damage with your Spear and your Flamethrower, and if you don't have Janthier, you can rock Pistol, which does the same thing, just a bunch of Condis. And realistically, this build is arguably one of the easiest ones to run. So if you're a new player and you do have an Engineer and you want something that can easily blast through the open world, here you go, the Celestial Mechanist. With that, we have all 9 Immortal builds that work fairly well in the open world, and once again, please play around with the sigils and relics to find out what you want to play. There is no going wrong in the open world. If you are playing solo, that is where you can definitely shine, and you can carry yourself or even carry groups through content. This is not just a legendary boss. These are things like soloing hero points, soloing the Zen Daijun puzzle, or soloing Dungeon Pass. These builds are capable of doing it. And if you have newer players or you want to, carry your significant other through some content, you're playing with a small group, these builds will definitely help you do that. And with that, I want to thank you for watching. A big thanks to all of my subscribers, and a special thanks to all of my members who support the channel. You guys are the real MVPs. Thanks again, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.